Just checking my stream quality before I get started. I just want to make sure that it's not dropping a bunch of frames and stuff. Because this is my first time using ultra low latency mode through Streamlabs. Alright, sounds like it's alright at the moment. So, anyway. AMD has released FidelityFX Super Resolution for the games that support it at the moment, which aren't very many. But there is Godfall, which is realistically, I would say it's one of the worst games I've ever played. Visually, it looks alright. It looks pretty good even. And the controls themselves are not exactly clunky. They don't feel like really old school tank controls, which is kind of what it is actually. But I tried it out because it actually came with my... I bought a 5700 XT sometime when today's GPUs had come out with the RX 6000 series as well as the RTX 30 series. And I bought a 5700 XT anyway instead. And my FPS is low just from running Streamlabs. Looks like a little low anyway. Had a little bit of a hitch there. But yeah, so I bought a 5700 XT and it came with Godfall. And I played it for a few hours and decided this game's not worth my time, not even for free. Which was a real disappointment. Because I thought, oh, cool, free game. And at the time, I had only read that it was Snapshot Slideshot Toil and Trouble is still here. Wow. This one is also really good. But yeah, so I had only read that it was highly anticipated before its release, and so I had some high hopes for it. I tried it out, and it was not great. I don't really need these, but it's not like Flavor is really worth anything, so I might as well buy them in case I decide to do some Crucible. But in any case, yeah, I tried it out. It was terrible, but it is one of the games that includes FidelityFX Super Resolution, so it's one of the games that they're sort of benchmarking this new technology with. There's also Anno 1800 or Anno 1800 as it's referred to. And maybe that's how the developers pronounce it as well. I don't know if they speak Italian or not, but I've got 3 hours to finish these up. I guess I can do one at least. I'll just play a match of Control while I talk about this nonsense. And if anybody has anything to say on the topic, go ahead and feel free to leave it in the comments or whatever. But yeah, so FidelityFX Super Resolution has just been released, and the really promising side of it is that apparently it's very easy to implement. So where DLSS now has a good amount of titles, a couple dozen or a few dozen titles that support it, it is exclusive to RTX video cards, of course. And so that was one of the big selling points for RTX cards, was that you could use DLSS, and DLSS 1.0 was absolute garbage, where DLSS 2.0 and now 2.1 and 2.2 being the future release are excellent. But the thing is that AMD's FidelityFX Super Resolution doesn't require any specific hardware, and so you can run it on anything. You can run it on an RTX 30 series, 20 series. You can even run it on GTX 10 series or 9 series, and maybe even further back. I saw somebody was using it on a GT 710 with good results. So that's excellent, because a GT 710 is a card that runs like absolute garbage in modern games. Like, I had a GT 710. My brother sent it to me for free because he just had it lying around when I was building my son's computer. And so I threw it in there just to set up the PC, and I thought, well, let me just boot it up and see what happens. And so I set Destiny 2 to 720p at 50% or 25%, whatever the lowest is, resolution, and it didn't break like 20 FPS. Like, it would do 20 FPS max, and that's it. Even with the lowest settings at 720p, the lowest settings at such a low percentage. But now, if Destiny 2 would have included that, perhaps I could have run it and gotten 30 FPS and just locked it at 30 and called it a day, so that it at least is running similar to console settings. This, of course, being because Destiny 2 doesn't support crossplay. I mean, it is starting to now. They sort of have a beta for it, but they didn't, so my son and I couldn't play Destiny 2 together. But FidelityFX Super Resolution is currently in 7 games and is going to be added to many more titles, I hope, and I kind of predict, because, well, the PlayStation and Xbox are both RDNA 2 architecture, and they're, I mean, from sort of the independent testing from Gamers Nexus, and I believe even Hardware Unbox might have done it. They compared it to something to like a GTX 1070, which is not a bad card. I've seen plenty of people, plenty of the console fans, or fanboys, I guess, really upset that Gamers Nexus had said that the PS5 was only about as good as a GTX 1070. Considering that's pretty far behind the current top hardware, but it's really not bad at all. But what's really promising about FidelityFX Super Resolution, or FSR, is that it apparently is very easy to implement. I wonder why this is having so much trouble finding a match. I guess I'll try it again. But there was one developer in particular who said it took them only 2 hours to get it into the game. It had some trouble with the anti-aliasing that they were using, which was actually native to Unity. And so they removed that anti-aliasing and used AMD's own anti-aliasing for it, and then spent some time sort of trying to optimize it afterward. But they did get it to work right out of the gate after about 2 hours from when they started. So they were able to put it into the game within 2 hours. And then there was another studio who said it took them about 2 days. And then after that, they spent some time optimizing it. So apparently it's very, very easy. I mean, I still don't know if you could call that easy, but it's easy for professional game developers or professional game development teams. This is not loading me in at all, and I wonder if it has to do with the latency of the stream. And but let's see, maybe we'll just go somewhere else. So we'll just go to Cosmodrome. It's kind of where I like to go when I'm a little burnt out on Destiny, and just kind of go here and remember when I first started playing. But yeah, a lot of people, of course, are calling FSR a DLSS competitor, and I think I mean, I understand why, because it's sort of trying to do the same thing, that it's upscaling, real-time upscaling, to in an attempt to give you better FPS, better frame rate performance at little to marginal fidelity cost. So in the event that you're using the ultra performance mode, they compare it. Well, they say that in real time, if you're not really looking at it and looking for errors or artifacts and things like that, that it does look pretty close. It basically looks like native. And then if you use one of the lower quality modes, then it starts to become noticeably worse. But it apparently is pretty good, and they're saying it's pretty close to DLSS 2.0, where a lot of people had expected it to look more like DLSS 1.0, which was absolute garbage. So that's one good thing, is that right out of the gate they've gotten it right. Hope the game sound isn't too loud. I guess I could fire off a few rounds and see how it sounds. Yeah, that's not too bad. Alright, anyway. The one reason I don't like that it's being compared so directly, and it just kind of will be, like I said, because they're attempting to sort of pursue the same results or to solve the same issues. But the reason it isn't a competitor to it for me is that DLSS 2.0 or DLSS at all was used as marketing for DLSS technology, or as an incentive to buy an RTX card, where FSR is absolutely not, because they're not really trying to sell you on anything, at least not yet, not with the current FSR, because you can use it on any NVIDIA card as far back as the 900, and you can use it as far back for an AMD card as the 400 series, so the 480, 470, 460, and also the 500 series cards, of course, and anything after that. So it will not work apparently with the R series, like the R9 and R7 for example, 390 or R9 Nano and the 290, 290X, 270, and so on. So it won't work with those cards, but anybody who's got an RX 480 or later should be able to use it, as well as Ryzen APUs, which is pretty fantastic for the APU users, because especially the people who built an APU gaming PC during this time when it's been so hard to get a hold of a decent graphics card for a reasonable price, you know. So it is going to be very good for those people who can now, where they were struggling to maybe hit a reasonable frame rate, a playable frame rate in a game that they wanted to be able to play on their PC. They can now potentially do so with less of a loss in quality than simply lowering resolution. Because of course you can set it to 1080p and then drop it down so that it's rendering 720 and then upscaling it to 1080 with FSR, or you can actually set it to 720, and they say that the FPS loss using FSR compared to actually setting it to 720 is about 8%, but you stand to gain a lot more using FSR that's being upscaled from 720 than trying to actually run it in 1080. So I think an 8% loss is not bad, and they say that not only that, but it is basically impossible using other known methods to get the same visual quality with a 720p setting. And when they've tried to replicate basically the same frame rate as what you get with FSR, that you end up having to drop the settings so far lower that it is very obviously bad. And so basically every major tech reviewer has been saying that when FSR is available in a game, you should use it, and the ultra quality mode is basically lossless, virtually lossless. Yeah, so the only one qualm I have with the comparison to DLSS, or calling it a competitor, is that it's not being used to sell you anything. The hope is that this is going to replace bicubic, bilinear, Lanscos, or any other type of traditional upsampling that already occurs. And I don't think it's supposed to be used in place of any traditional method of anti-aliasing. It's supposed to be used in conjunction with it, because it is grabbing, for example, if you use if you're playing in 4K but you're using FSR to render it at 1080 and upscale it to 4K, that the artifacting that occurs and aliasing that occurs at 1080 will still be visible, even though it's trying to run it in 4K. Those artifacts and some of that aliasing will still occur. But if you use anti-aliasing along with it to get rid of some of that aliasing, as well as some terracing and things, then it'll be able to upsample it pretty well without too much loss to detail. The loss of detail is when there's the images themselves or models themselves really are so small that at 4K you could see them, but at 1080 you could not. So that's where it's really going to make a difference, where you're going to see a noticeable loss. But that's realistically only going to be true if you knew that that detail was going to be there otherwise. But if you just kind of ignore it, then if it looks as smooth as a 4K picture, then that's good. At least in my opinion. The one studio I really hope includes it is Unreal Engine. And the reason why is because I kind of tinker with Unreal, and I'm working on something at the moment. But I was on a bit of a hiatus because Unreal 4 has had deprecation occur. They've removed tessellation and displacement. I believe tessellation is still technically there, but it doesn't function properly, or at least doesn't allow you to use displacement. And as a result, where you get sort of all these contours here along the ground, where there's like a picture of a rock or something like that, like this here. This isn't perhaps a 3D model that's placed in here, and this one might be, but it might not be, and it might be an image which they're projecting the shape of using displacement. And so since that was deprecated with the anticipation of Unreal Engine 5, I've basically just put my project on hold. But now that UE5 is in early access, they've included, well, and this is the reason why they had removed traditional tessellation and displacement, is that they're going with nanite. Another thing that was deprecated, which is very interesting, is that ray tracing, which was in UE4, has been replaced by Lumen, which is a different technology that aims to produce very similar results without needing RTX hardware. That's funny to me every time. But that's sort of the hope, and at least at the moment, it does do a pretty good job, though the reflections leave something to be desired, I think. Though I haven't been messing with it too much, so I can't really say, and maybe a bigger company who's spent plenty of time making games in UE4 and has now been moving over to UE5 to try it out would be able to give us better insight as to whether they believe that Lumen is a reasonable replacement or a good reason to have deprecated ray tracing. And a few years ago, this would have been an obvious yes. Even just a year or two ago, this would have been an obvious yes, because the limited hardware that could run ray tracing in a visually demanding game was very minimal. Even with the use of DLSS. Here they come. So even with the use of DLSS, ray tracing was pretty hard to do. And so at that time, if you could get Lumen to produce similar results, That would have been cool. Not only that, but Nanite has done a very good job of replacing traditional displacements through tessellation. Yikes, I'm gonna die right here. Yikes. Yeah, there's too many of them. But yeah, Nanite has done a pretty good job of providing that, and the big thing that it does, in my opinion, is to remove unnecessary geometry, and by that I mean to reduce vertice and triangle count, poly count, basically, without loss to quality. And so when you want really high poly, very detailed textures, a lot of times you have to overdo it and then use LODs so that it, as it takes up less of your screen, it is reduced down to a lower quality or lower definition model because it's only taking up part of the screen. It doesn't need to be that highly detailed. And so traditionally you would use LODs, and Unreal Engine has done a really good job of auto-producing LODs, which is really cool. But now Nanite has taken it a step further, and it sort of on the fly adjusts it incrementally. As opposed to it being done in a few steps, it's now done to a degree that I've seen a few posts about it reducing triangle count down to about a quarter. And draw calls down similarly as well. So it's actually really nice. And the reason I'm mentioning this stuff is that this isn't hardware specific stuff. This is software, which is similar to the idea of FSR as opposed to DLSS, where DLSS is hardware dependent. And FSR is not. So you can basically just use it on anything you want. One big thing though is I did build my Sun PC pretty recently, and the cheapest reasonably good card I could get was an R9 290, which I'm happy with. Does a good job. Does a good job of running 1080-60. It'll run 1080-60 basically high setting in this game, so I think that's pretty cool. But AMD has said that they're no longer going to be providing support in upcoming drivers to that card. And I imagine this has to do maybe with FSR itself. I wonder if it's perhaps a UEFI specific technology, which would then contradict me and mean that it is hardware dependent, but not just hardware dependent specifically, because it's not exactly due to the hardware. It's because of the way that the hardware was supported via BIOS or by motherboards. Where for an R9 290 or any of the R9s or R7s, you would actually, what is this? You would actually have to set your BIOS to CSM instead of UEFI in order to get it to work. And then when the RX series, like the RX 400 came along, you could set it to UEFI. Which is new at the time, of course. Or newer. Now it's just industry standard. Yeah, and considering something like the R9 290 is, I don't know, 13 years old or something by now. Or, sorry, 8 years old, 2013. It's not a big deal. It's really not going to be running any AAA modern games anyway at very high settings. When you have consoles that can do a better job than the GPU, I think it's about time to upgrade. And the only reason I didn't get something better, of course, is because there's nothing available, or at least there wasn't at the time. But GPU prices are starting to come down slightly, which is cool. And this is due, of course, in part to cryptocurrency prices, specifically Ethereum, dropping significantly over the last month or so. I mean, they really hit a big peak. You couldn't get a hold of a graphics card for a while, and it just seemed like the price of Ethereum just kept going up, as well as Bitcoin. But it just seemed like they were going up forever. But of course, that's just not possible. And so now that it has been dropping, as many of us anticipated, now the prices are starting to come down, and there are more people dropping the prices on their cards, the cards they were able to get a hold of. Because that's kind of what I've been looking at, is later cards as opposed to an older card. Yeah, but it does seem like people have been dropping their prices considerably. It was really hard to get a hold of like a 6700 XT for less than $1,000 not that long ago, and now there are plenty of them up for $850 where they were originally listed for $1,000 or $950 or whatever. And so a lot of people, at least locally via Facebook Marketplace and OfferUp and things like that, have been lowering their prices steadily. And I think it's because they know that these prices are going to come down here in a minute, and either they make a little less money than they were hoping to now, or they're going to miss the boat and then end up making a lot less money when they're forced to basically sell them at retail or less than retail, which is what happened with the Ryzen processors. So all the scalpers for the Ryzen processors probably did not anticipate that those processors would become available so shortly thereafter. And fortunately for those of us who wanted them, and I didn't buy one because I have a 3900X and I'm happy with it, and I got a good deal on it. But yeah, for those people who wanted them, you know, thankfully they were able to get a hold of them shortly thereafter at MSRP. And because they were available at MSRP so regularly, even if they sold out quickly, people were willing to just try their chances and wait and check, follow the different streams or whatever to try to get a hold of one, because they knew it was so frequent and so many people had good luck with them that they'd rather take their chances with that than overpay to some scalper for their processor. And so hopefully that's what's going to happen here with GPUs in a minute, because now you see that if you look at Facebook Marketplace, you look at OfferUp or whatever for Ryzen CPUs for the 5000 series, you'll see that basically the 5600X, the 5800X, and I would say even to an extent, even the 5900X are all pretty much available at less than retail. The 5900X kind of ends up selling out pretty quickly just because there weren't as many of them. But the first one it happened to was the 5800X. And now all those scalpers who bought them and hoped to make a bunch of money off of them and tried to make too much money to the extent that they weren't able to sell theirs ahead of others, are now holding a product that they didn't want or didn't need, possibly don't even have a computer to put it in. Now they're just sitting there with their processor that you can go and buy at Amazon or at Best Buy or Micro Center or basically anywhere else, Walmart.com or wherever, for MSRP, and now they're forced to sell them at less than MSRP if they want to get anybody to buy it. So hopefully that is what's going to be happening with GPUs here in a minute, though it could take still a considerable amount of time. But in regards to FSR and DLSS, it is a competitor, of course, in the sense that it is aiming to do a very similar thing or to solve a similar problem, which is to increase performance without much fidelity loss. But the approach is, of course, very different. And the support for older hardware and for it to be indiscriminate is what makes them very different, actually. Because there were plenty of times that I had tried a game and thought, when I was using my 5700 XT, that it would have been cool to have maybe gotten a 2070 Super, shelled out the extra money so that I could enable DLSS. But I didn't want to because it was extra money. And although in rasterization their performance is very similar, with DLSS, of course, the 2070 Super would greatly outperform any of the AMD cards at the time. Where's that public event over there? I'm guessing. But yeah, the fact that AMD is allowing this to be used on GTX 900 series and newer, or even 700, since the 710 seems to work with it, and RX 400 and newer, makes it substantially different because it's not a selling point for an AMD card, or especially not for new AMD cards. Because what this does is it allows you to use your old stuff, whether it's AMD or Nvidia or even Intel at this point, and get a little more performance so you can hold out a little bit longer without having to buy something. Have I completed anything yet? Oh, I need grenade kills. But yeah, in that way I would say it's not a competitor, where DLSS is a selling point, even for new RTX cards. And that's still going to be their selling point. Nvidia is going to keep talking about how DLSS is basically lossless performance boost, and perhaps even that it's better than FSR. But and Gamers Nexus, Steve at Gamers Nexus had mentioned this as well, that Cyberpunk 2077 has DLSS. It also has AMD CAS, or Contrast Adaptive Sharpening, which, in my opinion, it does a good job of not necessarily upscaling the image, but just sort of, it almost looks like just good anti-aliasing.
Here to help.
And it's sort of simulating extra detail. It doesn't really add any more detail or anything. It doesn't provide any more detail, but it makes it look just a little bit sharper. But yeah, he said that they would. He doesn't suspect that AMD's FidelityFX Super Resolution would be implemented in it, because AMD doesn't want the comparison to DLSS 2.0. Since at this point, people still believe and I would agree with them that the picture quality of DLSS 2.0 is better, at least at the high end, and especially actually at the low end. So when you set it to one of the more performance-minded settings, balanced or performance mode, where the ultra quality settings are pretty similar. Yeah, and so Steven, Gamers Nexus, said that he suspects that it will not be added to Cyberpunk 2077, or at least that AMD would be apprehensive about putting it in there. Which, it's not really up to them. It would be up to the developer to add it into their game, to choose to or not. And I imagine that they would, because the thing is, if somebody already owns an RTX card and can use DLSS, then sure, they'd likely just use DLSS in a game where DLSS looks good, of course, like Cyberpunk or Control. But for anybody that owns a card that does not have can't use DLSS, I don't think they're going to be upset about the fact that they can use FidelityFX Super Resolution, but not DLSS. How many grenade kills did I have to get? I don't know, but I'll get a grenade here. Another grenade here in a minute. Or I can at least use my smoke bomb. Where are you guys at? Come on, don't die in one shot. Or I'll throw it at this guy. Alright, cool. I think I only need one more. Yeah, one more grenade kill. 3 super kills? I can do that real quick. There's only 2 guys in here. I'm gonna waste it in there. But I've got a grenade, I can use it on. Get out of here. Okay, there are a few guys here. I can just pull my super on them. There we go. This guy too. immune. Well, I've got a smoke bomb at least. Nobody? At the very least, I've been able to test my PC's performance at using ultra low latency stream mode of Streamlabs OBS. So that's good. And if anybody watched this or watches this and finds it boring because it's just dragging out, yeah, I apologize for that. I just figured I'd jump onto Destiny and do a couple bounties, and figured I'd talk about my thoughts on FSR while I'm at it. Anyway, I'll see you guys later. I'm going to shut it down.